become awakened tonight, and I see around this person his brother friars, friends from the soup kitchen, friends from the area, people I saw walking the door that haven't been here for a while, you know who you are, that come because of Simon, the gentle, kind, loving man that we wait tonight. And so we begin this as we begin everything. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
My husband's father and Simon's father were brothers. So it's been a long time and wonderful memories that we have of him. He taught my son to serve. He taught my daughter things. My daughter was in his she was the bride in his in his ordination, first mass. And it's just, I would say, Simon, who came first? The black Franciscans or the brown Francis? He said, whoever got there first. And we would tease him about that. And when he was in Africa, we worried to death about him. My kids were very little, and they said, do you think Simon might get eaten by a cannibal? So there's many memories we have of him. And his feet, he washed, the Pope washed his feet. I'm sure a lot of you, the family especially, have pictures of that. And we'll miss him. I mean, he was, I said to him one time, teasing, he liked to tease you. And I said, Simon, how did you come to get that name, Simon? I thought it was Peter Simon. He said, Barbara, that was the last one in the basket. So he was really, and the last word he said to me 2 weeks ago was, I love you, Barbara. So I guess, he's up there with my husband now, so I imagine they're talking a few things over. So, but it looks nice. It's nice that you all are here to see him tonight, and for us to, I wish it could have been a different one, but anyway. But thank you for coming.
Good evening. I'm Father Jim, one of the friars, and had really the honor. I see Ken ducked around over a corner here. Honor of living with Simon 3 times in my life. The first time when I was a student in Washington, D.C. studying theology, and Simon was working at Walter Reed Medical Center, and incredible minister, but he was also, as you know, very playful. And I remember we had another somewhat senior friar in the house, Father Berard, who was a little bit older than Simon, and one thing they like to do is have snowball fights in the house. And Simon thought Berard got the best of him, so he made these snowballs, and he said, I'm going to show him, and he put them in the freezer. He said, he's going to feel these. Fortunately, they all froze and stuck together, and he couldn't get them out later in the day. The second time I lived with Simon was over at St. Paul in PRP. And at that time, he had worked for some years at the Veterans Hospital, which he worked for many years. And it was right, I think, 1999, and he retired from full-time ministry. I remember right before dinner one night, a bishop that worked with the Archdiocese of the Military called him and personally thanked him for his ministry there at the VA hospital. Of course, he also worked at Walter Reed Hospital, which is an Army hospital, and really thanked him for the great ministry he did, because word had filtered around in many circles about the great ministry he was to people in very desperate times or very painful times. And Simon had a touch with that, and I think that was one of his many gifts. The last time I lived with him was here at Mount St. Francis, and one of the images that struck me, Simon always liked to walk out by the cemetery, often praying the rosary or saying prayers, and there's a chair under the holly tree out there, and he just liked to sit there, and I just think about all his friends and other friars and brothers, religious brothers who had gone before him. He would also bring flags out on Veterans Day, Memorial Day, and put those by all the headstones for our friars who were veterans. He just had that connection. Simon was just a man very sensitive to the care and needs of others. He had some difficult weeks and months these last, so we thank God that he's now at peace.
Hi, I'm Patrick Murda. I'm Uncle Donnie's nephew. You probably know him as Father Simon. To a lot of us on the left side over here, he was Uncle Donnie. So some of the fondest memories I have of Uncle Donnie when I was a little boy. So when I was a little boy, he was in Africa for most of my life, up until I guess age 18 or 19. And for a lot of my, I can't really see you guys over there, but a lot of my cousins, it was a really big deal when Uncle Donnie came home, right? He came home maybe every 6 or 7 years. So we'd all go out, meet him at the airport, and we all knew we were going to Grandma and Grandpa's house to have a big dinner and go play in the cemetery, right? I know that playing in the cemetery may sound like a strange thing, but for us it was really, really cool. So even when we got older and he would spend time at my house and at Christmas and other events, we would always talk about the things or the guidance he gave us. He was only here for short periods of time, but we'd go on trips to Fort Knox and to St. Mary's College where he went to high school and other things, and he would give us words of wisdom. And it only dawned on me about 2 years ago that even when he came back from Africa and we were all growing up, he would still give us wisdom in very subtle ways. Even a message I got from him about 3 years ago, he was staying at our house, just gave me a gentle message that quite honestly I probably didn't appreciate at the time, but the more that I thought about it, it probably made me a better parent, a better father, and a better husband.
I'm kind of representing the Franciscan Kitchen tonight, and a number of our volunteers are out here who knew and love Father Simon, and we kind of were there for his last ministry. And we really didn't know until we kind of got him talking about all the many, many other ministries that he had. But he attacked that last ministry like you wouldn't believe. And I think he outworked most of us. Many of us volunteer 1 day, maybe 2 days a week. And for a long time, he was there 3 days a week. And the most important part of his ministry, we, the staff and the volunteers, we really enjoyed him. But the most important part was our guests who came in, because he would be there and he would listen to anybody and he would console them, and he was just a very vital part of that. And he and Kenny his brother, were just great volunteers for 10 plus years. Kenny probably for 20 plus years, I'm not sure. But anyway, he was vital to our soup kitchen, and in behalf of our guests at the kitchen, we thank you, Father Simon.
I lived with Simon Sauer for a number of years here at Mount St. Francis. Simon Sauer had an amazing life. And I could tick off all the accomplishments and all the things that he did. Africa would certainly be at the top of the list. But I didn't know him during those times. I knew him here since I moved in 2010. And what I loved about him was how enterprising he was. He was a man in his late 70s or early 80s that could have just sat back and lived life kind of one day at a time, but that was not who Simon was. He decided at one point that he weighed too much, which is a surprising thing for a friar, you might be saying, that they would say to himself, I weigh too much. And he started going to Weight Watchers. And he got into Weight Watchers and really lost 75, 100 pounds. He lost a lot of weight to the point where his clothes, he had to get new clothes, which was a problem because with poverty, he didn't want to have to go out and buy all these, new or used clothes, but he had to because he lost so much weight. And he really did a good job. He'd sit down at supper and he'd have lettuce and grapes and oil and vinegar. He'd have a plate of that. And I thought, that'll last about a week. Like, that would really be record-breaking for us. And he did that for months. It was amazing. He would get up and walk, and he tripped over a bale of fencing we had during our picnic. It was one of our orange fence that was rolled up. And he laid out there for, I don't know, half an hour, and it scared him, and he said to me when he finally was able to get back up and walk in, he said, I need a cell phone where I can push a 0 and get an operator. And I said, Simon, they don't even have operators anymore. That's like a thing from the past, And I didn't really know what to tell him, so he found a phone that was far cheaper than any of the phones that we have. It was like $19 a month. And you push the button, the 0 button, and a person would answer. Now, this was not an enterprising 30-something. This was a 70 and 80-year-old person who was exceptionally enterprising. And I was just sitting there thinking, I wonder why he was like that. And it occurred to me maybe a lot of things. Obviously, I would give credit to the Holy Spirit and to God. But I don't think you can go to Africa and be in Africa or any mission land where the resources are so thin and not learn how to be resourceful.
Story about Simon was he moved to our place right next door, 2 years ago, year and a half, whatever. And anyway, one day we were sitting there having lunch, and I had a sandwich, and I cut it, rather than cutting down like that, well, I cut it kitty corner. He said, "Oh, you cut like they do downtown." I said, "Excuse me?" Mother said, she said many years ago that whenever they do that downtown, we don't do that in our house. So, and every time I cut a sandwich from now on, I can think of Father Simon. But anyway, that was him. I've got this little email that this lady in Cary, Ohio at our mission office, where I had worked many years ago, and she started volunteering there when I was there, and she continued up until, well, she worked there more than 30 years, I think. And anyway, I emailed her the other night and said that he had finally given in and died. And she sent me this little email. She said, "I have a Father Simon story to share with you. I think it's the last time I saw him. Brother Brian, who also worked in Africa for many years, and I had been working on a plaque to honor all of the friars who had served in the missions. That was Brother Brian's last official act on behalf of FMA before he died. He went over and ordered the plaque, and it hangs on the fence by the patio. It hadn't been there for very long when Father Simon comes to Cary. He is standing there looking at it and asking me what it is. I told him it was our way of remembering the friars who had served in the missions. He asked me if it was for the ones who had passed away. And I told him, "No, Simon, you don't have to die to be honored." Several times I would see him just looking at it, and he called it the wall. Guess that will be my memory of him. And it probably will be the memory for many of him. He is, as Paul said, his rather dry sense of humor, but he had it with him. He was right with it all the way. So he's a blessing to us, a very big blessing, in fact.
He loved his brothers, he loved God, and he loved his family. He led a very meaningful life. He was truly my friend. And obviously, he has touched many lives. Such a wonderful uncle. I have one little story to tell you all. One night I was asleep. The Holy Spirit came to me and said, "It is time to go see Simon." I then called the cousins that were able to go, which was Patrick, who spoke earlier, and his son, Simon's namesake. And he was just absolutely worried about getting his bicycle over to the retreat home. And if you noticed in his obituary, it says, and you see the mountain bike there. So I think that was his memory of riding the bike in Africa and spreading his love, joy, and happiness to the poorest of the poor.
I'm Friar Christian from Incarnation and St. Francis Friary in Louisville. And about 4 years ago, Simon and I drove to Lorain, Ohio, and on the way up he told me about the story of his trip to Africa. And Friar Paul said he was enterprising. He was adventuresome, because the guys, when they went to Africa at first, they didn't know if they were hardly ever going to come back. It was going to be sort of, that's it, they're going to be there. And I think they went for 7-year stints at first. But Father Regis is here. Is Father Regis here? He's still, no, he's not here. He would probably be able to correct me, but when we were students at Cary, Ohio, these guys were on their way to Africa. And they had this big truck that looked like a covered wagon that said Africa or bust. And they got in this truck and they went to New York City to deport. And on the way, they went to I think it's the Holland Tunnel in the middle of New York, and the truck ran out of gas in the middle of the Holland Tunnel, and and it got backed up. They backed up the traffic, and finally a policeman got inside, and he looked at it, and he says, heck, all you have to do is switch it over to the reserve tank. so it went on. But then when he got to Africa, they drove, it wasn't like they do now. They fly in. They landed in Angola, and that's a long, Africa is huge. They drove all the way across the Angola, all the way over to northern Rhodesia at the time, Zambia now. And he says, well, we never knew we were going to get the next gas station or what was going to happen, and all the different adventures they had on the way. And when finally they ran into the friars and got connected with the friars that were already there, it was such a relief for him. But that was such an adventure for him. And God bless him. He's giving us an example of people willing to reach out and do something that's really shows a lot of guts.
I'm Kenneth Gary. I'm one of the friars that live here at Mount St. Francis, and I knew Simon from way back, and I know that when way back we were together quite a bit as seminarians, and we both were in Minnesota and studied for the priesthood. I was there with him for 5 years, and for sure, being together, we did not have. One of the things that was similar with him and me is that our recreation time, our free time, for sure we were together quite a bit, and we realized we're going to have certain limitations in so many ways, even the limitations of not being able to type, not being able to have computers in the room, would not know how to operate them. But we know that at the foundation of his life, that he was truly with the Lord. I remember him more as a priest than any other way of memory. I know that he, like myself, most of our time was spent in ministry, going to hospitals or nursing homes in our ministry. And we both appreciate that better than, I think, in parish life. And then finally, I'm going to be chaplain at Province Retirement Home. Simon was there the last few weeks, and I know that one of the great inspirations given to me was that his family was very faithful in being with him for so long. And for sure, they showed a great deal of love. And looking back upon his love they showed to him just these last 2 weeks or 3 weeks, that even before that, one of his highlights of his life was to keep in close touch with his family. His family was very thoughtful in giving him care, concern, and love, and truly one appreciated by them and by him. And so we give thanks to God for good memories of Simon, and I think he was ready for the Lord, but the Lord was waiting for a little bit, and but he finally took him and Simon in. I don't know how that worked out in his life or in the spiritual help he needed, but we know, and the family knows that that from way back when, early in life, he was a good, holy, and spiritual man, a good Franciscan, and a person who truly was able to realize that everything he was doing was of the honor and glory of God. So we ask God to help him to know all the more his presence with Simon Sauer.
I've really enjoyed your all's visions of Simon and how you knew him and how you got to know him and different things that he did. I really never saw that side of Simon. And I think that the Lord was helping me out to get to know him better through visiting him at the nursing home, and then also being able to spend his last month at the hospital or else at the nursing home. And it gave me a vision of Simon that I never really saw before. But you hear the expression a quiet and gentle spirit. He definitely had this. I always think of that as being in a woman, but I saw it in this man. And one of the most beautiful things I think that came out of a lot of this is that Kenny and Eddie, the two brothers, got to spend 8 days at the nursing home with him the last week of his life. That's beautiful. And I think Simon was aware that they were there, and that's all. Thank you so much.
Compassion, gentleness, kindness, perseverance. I think we can use all of that when we talk about Simon. And we've all been graced to know and to love.
Good morning. My name is Father Ken Barch. I'm one of the friars here at Mount St. Francis. Father Simon was a dear friend of mine, and I am the chaplain at the VA hospital in Louisville, Kentucky. I took his place almost 10 years ago when he retired. Father Simon wasn't so old that he told the same story over and over again. But I remember one story he told more than once. After the long trip from the Mount to New York Harbor, he boarded ship and sailed for Africa. Arriving at whatever port in Africa, he would travel overland by dusty, unpaved roads to Zambia, which is an inland country, nowhere near the coast. Even after 2 weeks at sea, he would still have to travel many days to his assigned mission. In those days, a missionary could expect 10 years to pass before he would see his family, friends, and homeland again. Each passing hour of each passing day took this young man farther from home. As the ship sailed out of New York Harbor, past Ellis Island and the Statue of Liberty, Father Simon heard the long, mournful sound of the ship's horn. As he told the story, he would sound the horn again. Woo. Woo! How hard it was for that young man to travel abroad in obedience to a missionary vocation. He had asked for the assignment and was grateful to receive the mission cross here in this chapel at Mount St. Francis. But such a long journey. When he returned 20 years later, he returned to a different country. So much had changed. It was in many ways another foreign country, all the stranger for its familiarity. Such is the fate of refugees and missionaries.